William Thomas Stead was a giant in the Victorian publishing and journalism world. He is now recognized as one of the most innovative journalists of his age, and his methods, criticisms, and perspectives are applied in today's journalistic and publishing practices. He produced much controversy among his contemporaries, yet his perseverance allowed him to pioneer investigative journalism and to spread his message about the power of the press and, consequently, the responsibility that journalists assumed when they wrote. Not only was he one of the more dexterous Victorian journalists, but he was also one of the most diverse newspaper people of his time. He wrote numerous essays about journalism and newspaper publishing practices, and he was a prominent social critic who applied his theories about journalism to his work as a journalist. He wrote about reform, prostitution, social justice, morality, religion, wars, and massacres, upholding a sense of liberalism and evangelism throughout all of his ventures. Over 69 years, Stead developed into his own brand. His influence spread from humble beginnings in the provincial newspaper press, to becoming a prominent name in the London newspaper business, to being a household name across 3 continents. W.T. Stead was born on July 5, 1849 in Embleton, Northumberland. He was the son of a congregational minister, and this background formed the basis of his upbringing. He was heavily influenced by his home education, and the moral foundation that he acquired influenced most of his career. Most sources agree that Stead's faith was so devout that he could have followed his father into ministerial life, but journalistic opportunities led him in a different path. Nevertheless, his religious roots were present throughout his career, and they formed the basis of all the work that he did. His theories about journalism have fragments of his moral compass, and his journalism is filtered constantly through this lens. Stead's introduction to journalism came from John Copleston from the Northern Echo. Stead contributed to the provincial paper in the early 1870s and seemingly did so for free. Copleston's motivations were conflicting. On one hand, he enjoyed Stead's free labor. On the other hand, Copleston was actively invested in Stead's career and acted as a mentor for him. Their relationship must have been strong because Stead had a difficult time deciding whether to take over the editorship when it was offered to him in 1871. Not wanting to go behind his mentor Copleston's back, Stead hesitated to take the position. However, Copleston stepped down unprovoked, and Stead was able to assume the editorship without anxiety. The publication was floundering when he took it over, but he quickly turned it into his own organ for social reform. Under Stead's guidance, the Northern Echo flourished in part because of the changes prompted by the 1870 Education Act, and partly because of the railway. Stead capitalized on the mail train, which allowed him to spread his publication circulation around England and especially connected to the London market. The religious background that I discussed previously played a prominent role in Stead's work for the Northern Echo. This was where his first ventures into discussions about prostitution occurred. He tackled this taboo subject and caused a great stir. He remained committed to this subject, and it would eventually make him notorious, as I will discuss later. The Northern Echo denounced anything that Stead believed was an atrocity. Most notably, he denounced Turkey's response to the Bulgarian rebellion and caused great public uproar with his response. This journalism denounced the Disraeli government's inaction and prompted the revival of former Prime Minister William Gladstone's career. This strong support likely expanded Stead's notoriety in London, and his minor fame eventually earned him an opportunity to leave the provincial press. In 1880, he took a position as assistant editor of the Pall Gazette. John Morley, then editor of the paper, was already successful, and he and Stead made a strong team. The relationship, according to the DNB, was fraught, and most sources confirm that the arrangement was tense because they did not share the same views. Stead struggled to adapt to London life and found the London newspaper world inadequate. The prominent and influential papers did not maximize their role, and they did not assume the responsibility that he believed that they should. He found most of their dialogue frivolous and was convinced that they did not possess the weight or strength to influence the market. It was around this time that Stead developed a more pronounced ideology of what a newspaper should be. Journalism, for Stead, should be an agent for social reform. Journalists held great power to influence politics and society in a positive way, and according to Stead, they should leverage this power to their advantage. They had a responsibility to bear the truth and expose injustices. By doing so, journalism had the opportunity not only to report and explain, but rather to effect positive social change. These views became hotly contested, and the new journalism of Stead clashed with traditional London journalism. Prominent literary figures like Matthew Arnold and Algernon Swinburne denounced this approach. But it did not matter because Stead's sensational stories and reports produced excellent results and generated excellent dialogue on these social issues. He promoted what he called government by journalism because he believed that the newspaper could do more than any government could. For Stead, governments and parliament were limited by laws and regulation in ways that the newspaper was not. Government could not accomplish all that the newspaper could. Between regular recesses, speeches that were limited by time and frequency, and the need for votes, government officials could only accomplish so much. For Stead, newspapers offer a strong alternative because the press is never closed. It continues year-round, and although it must abide by some laws, it can reach the public in ways that governments cannot. It can influence public opinion while also being able to influence the government. The newspaper for Stead was, quote, a necessity of life. So when he became the Pall Gazette's editor in 1883 after Morley took a position in Parliament, Stead had a strong foundation of ideas to grow the paper. Over the next 7 years, he was able to develop this philosophy and produce strong journalism. Under Stead's guidance, the Pall Gazette transformed from being a more moderate chronicler of news and events to being an agent of social progress. It became heavily political, which was a large departure from its former status as a gentleman's magazine. It tried to uncover conspiracies and social injustices, and was so successful that it flourished while being heavily criticized. Despite its detractors, its achievement was great. It generated much public discussion about women's rights to equal employment, and it notably forced the government's hand on several issues. The Gazette decried social injustices and situations where government support lacked. Some of the most important examples include his appeal to deploy General Gordon to evacuate Anglo-Egyptian troops from Khartoum in Sudan. Under Stead, the Gazette published a survey of the London slums and the London poor by Andrew Mearns called The Bitter Cry of Outcast London. And it also produced a set of essays called The Truth About the Navy, which prompted £3.5 million of extra support for the Navy. Perhaps the paramount success story for Stead's new journalism was his series of articles called The Maiden Tribute of Modern Babylon. These articles exposed a child prostitution ring that Stead discovered while working at Salvation Army. The public outcry following these articles prompted the revival of the Criminal Law Amendment Act to increase the age of consent from 13 to 16. What should have been a huge coup for Stead and a boon for his career quickly became a nightmare when he was prosecuted under the very law that he helped to change. He had planned a demonstration to show how easily these girls could be purchased. To complete his demonstration, he purchased the, quote, 5-pound virgin, who he named Lily in the Pall Gazette articles. The girl was, in fact, as Gavin Weightman revealed in 2012, Eliza Armstrong, and her purchase had dire consequences for Stead. He was sentenced to 3 months in prison under the Amendment Act, and his journalistic reputation never fully recovered. Weightman's monograph reveals even more of Stead's suspect journalistic practices. So how do we evaluate Stead's new journalism? Is it a worthy theoretical principle that can affect positive social change? Or does it require a hypocritical and sometimes immoral or illegal approach to have any merit? Although Stead was persecuted for this particular event, his other successes show that his journalistic approach was worthy of consideration. Perhaps it was too ideal to work completely, but the premise gained many supporters, including Cardinal Manning and Lord Shaftesbury, who did a lot of good throughout England. Eventually, Stead left the Pall Gazette to start a paper with less rigorous demands. He became weary of following the schedule of a daily newspaper, and in 1890 he began the Review of Reviews, a monthly compendium and review of the best articles and published materials in England. It included condensed novels and their best scenes, character sketches, and indeed, prolific reviews. The concept took off, and the Review of Reviews had a long run, exceeding Stead's own life by 31 years. However, some readers grew tired of Stead's strict moral code and his various campaigns to promote social justice, which bled into the periodical's pages. On one hand, Stead's desire to advocate various causes, men, women, and events, kept the contents fresh because, as one critic put it, readers never knew what new cause he would undertake in that month's edition. On the other hand, this uncertainty hindered how far-ranging the periodical's brand could extend. It was unpredictable, at times pedantic, and sometimes excessively preachy. Nevertheless, Stead remained an ardent advocate of women's suffrage. He campaigned against Charles Stewart Parnell, and he continued his devotion to spiritualism. His strong stance about the war in South Africa fractured some of his most prominent relationships, such as his association with Cecil Rhodes and Alfred Miller, and it temporarily damaged the Review of Review's reputation. His campaign against the Boer War contributed to his being nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize on several occasions, and many believe that he would win it in 1912, but he died before the winner was selected. The extra time that a monthly publication afforded him allowed Stead to expand his scope as a journalist. Over the next 20 years of his career, he began a plethora of new publications that extended his influence beyond England. He established the American Review of Reviews and the Australian Review of Reviews, which put him on the international map. All three reviews seem to have been successful, with the most successful being his original English publication, which, at its height, circulated 300,000 copies per issue between 1890 and 1899. Stead also published a spiritual periodical called Borderland. It was devoted to his moral principles and his focus on spiritualism. Although it was shorter-lived than many of his other ventures, Stead kept it alive for over 4 years between 1893 and 1897. It was issued quarterly and was distributed at a shilling. Although circulation numbers are currently unknown, Stead himself was surprised when such a concentrated magazine took off. In the preface to the first volume, Stead explains that, quote, "I fully expected that any organ devoted to this investigation would be published at a loss. So far from this being the case, the magazine has paid its expenses from the first number, and it is at this moment one of the most widely circulated quarterlies in the world." Another notable publication during this period was the penny popular novels, which were issued between 1896 and 1900. It marked a departure from Stead's other newspaper ventures, and it showed a different side of Stead's publishing acumen. The work contained no original content. Instead, it reprinted popular works by authors such as George MacDonald, H. Rider Haggard, Émile Zola, and John Bunyan. Despite this success, not all was well in Stead's final years. He tried to begin a daily paper and failed, nearly resulting in bankruptcy. He lost his eldest son in 1907. His reputation was negatively impacted by his devotion to spiritualism. He contributed to a failed publication called The Sound in 1900 and did not receive the anti-war platform that he sought from the publication. Finally, Stead was a first-class passenger on board the RMS Titanic on her maiden voyage in the spring of 1912. He did not survive when the ship sank on April 14th and the morning of April 15th. To this day, it is difficult to discuss Stead without mentioning his demise on board the Titanic. His body was never recovered, and much of his final days are a mystery. There is an eerie reel available on YouTube showing Stead speaking on 1912, and this is one of the final records that we have of him. The video shows a man with a dominant presence, his fingers pointing here, there, and everywhere. The first impression one receives is that he is an imposing figure who will stop at nothing to get his point across. While this interpretation is influenced by what one already knows about Stead, the clip seems fitting. Stead was hugely influential, and he is recognized as one of the prominent newspaper and social figures from the 19th century. He experienced great success and tried his hand at several ventures. He was uncompromising, and his views challenged the norm. Although he had his detractors, his positions provoked positive social change and prompted the world to reevaluate journalism's role in our daily lives. Thanks for listening.